after having seen the Posca Gold, things like this, things like the brushstroke, not as goldy. and that's a subjective thing, but
You heard it here. You heard it here first, folks. Not as goldy.
hashtag stationers. Hello and welcome to Stationery Test Drive, where today we are checking out Parley Poppins, their flute flavored rolls that come in this pack, which is silver on the outside and stripy. And also, it's in this real form factor that's just like perfectly shaped for excellent mouthfeel. And, huh. Um, Hello and welcome to Stationery Test Drive, where every week we look at stationery that's cool and colorful and fun. And this week, well, we don't have Poppins, but we have something else. I'm Vishal.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal, and Vishal has already mentioned what we're reviewing for the episode.
Which is the Sakura Permapaque Opaque Pigment Marker in several eye-popping colors, hence the Poppins. Easily confused. These are markers that are, well, permanent and opaque, I'm guessing, is the origins of this portmanteau.
Opaque pigment markers, it says. It comes with a chisel and a bullet tip. And I believe it's water-based and pigment-based. So that's the mix.
And from the esteemed Sakura company. Now, we're going to have an interesting time with these because these are not very new, are they, Minjal?
No, I actually got these 3 or 4 years ago, so it's been a while now.
Which is a long time in marker years.
Yeah, and in some ways these are not cheap markers, so you kind of hope that they'll last you a while. Let's see how this purple one, chisel tip, goes. It works at least. That's a pretty good thing. It has the bullet and the chisel tip. Both of them work. Now, we've tested these out, of course. That's what we do on a show called Stationery Test Drive. The last time I checked, and maybe this time we'll get lucky, yeah, this green is gone. Either through use or through neglect.
Through neglect.
Through
yes.
neglect.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's... And I know it seems absurd to say that your marker should last 4 or 5 years, but we have had markers last 4 or 5 years, so... but Minjal, why don't you show us, you've drawn some lines on this for some sort of experiment, haven't you? So pick one of these and show us, and we can talk more about these kinds of markers, because...
So I used, for the test that I did, I've used these markers on a smooth paper. Now, my observation was that when you actually use it on paper that is more textured, there is some amount of opaqueness or that you can maybe observe, which is not very apparent on smooth papers. But, after having used our favorite the Poscas, these are not really as opaque as one would wish.
Yeah, like
they
talking
were.
about the Poscas, we have one here, which we had tested out before, and it's a bullet tip, but it's a finer bullet tip than this one. It's about half the gauge, let's say. But this one is what, to my eyes, even with all the pilling that's happening from the rough paper, to my eyes at least, even going down, and certainly once it is down, is more of a defined opaqueness, if I may use that term. Don't you guys think that as well?
Yeah, I think the Poscas are just the best piece of stationery in the last decade that we've come across.
And the Poscas are expensive. Let's not kid ourselves. You can, especially if you're living somewhere outside a first world country, so to speak, like we are in India. There are import duties. There are all sorts of things that make these prohibitively expensive, and in some ways investments, because as stationery lovers, we do like to invest our money and our time into something that is good and long lasting, and that's the silver one. Not particularly opaque on white paper, a bit more silvery and a bit more opaque. Certainly, if you put it down a few times, let me try that.
Also reminds me of the Brustro metallic colors.
Yeah, and, we're going to sound like a broken record on this. We had these problems with that seemingly, let's face it, it's advertised as sort of a Posca competitor. Maybe not directly, but that is the kind of the same market that the Poscas, these, and things that are Indian like the Brustros are trying to be. But so far the Poscas, and we have various versions. We have a nice gold here, and we'll get back to the gold because I tried to use the gold in this one. It is a pretty, we're not going to swear on this show, but a pretty bad gold. This is a good gold. This is the Posca gold. It's well worth the money, the Posca Gold 2.5. And for comparison's sake, here is the extremely muddy green. This is in some ways the opposite of the Brustro, which was a muddy red and a muddy orange rather than a gold. Again, slightly better on
darker paper.
But considering that the Posca is kind of the same on both papers, that is the problem with the Permapaques in this form. Now, I don't know if when they're brand new, they're much better. But like we said, sometimes we get these things new, but we also are enthusiasts who keep things around for a long time and use them. And sometimes they get used up, but maybe you get a set and everything isn't used up. Yeah. In which case, why would you buy these?
The ability to use something after months and years is very much a realistic expectation.
And yeah, the colors are nice. Like I specifically kind of liked the look of
this orange.
Orange, but it wasn't suitable for my test drive this week, which we'll see in a bit. But yeah, it's a nice electric orange. So in that case, if you want to draw like a nice orange lolly or a popsicle or whatever you want, that's the colors are really nice when they're good, but some of them are not. This sickly green gold, which pills a lot even on smooth paper, that's a problem I'll come back to later. The purple is nice. Yeah, these are good things, but also maybe they're not good enough in a world where the Posca exists. Is that more or less, are we in agreement with that? Because that was my take on it.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I think the problem with a lot of these is that they are being made in reaction to the Posca's popularity.
Because the Poscas were pioneers.
Yes.
They're like a liquid paint marker almost. They don't even call themselves what these people call, which is like a opaque pigment marker. It's terminology, I'm guessing, to weave around each other's patents.
I assume that the Poscas were invented somewhere in the 80s, early 80s, I think. And since then, their popularity has just grown and grown over the next few decades.
Let's have a look at this on
the Poscas being made by the Unipin or the Mitsubishi pencil company. So now all of the other manufacturers who are in similar tools have obviously been trying to, I guess, figure out something that can be called a paint marker.
Yeah.
And I guess we saw something like that with the Brustro a couple of weeks ago. This is Sakura's try. The thing is that I assume, again, it's a patent thing. But all of these people are going at it from a traditional marker point of view. And there's just limitations in that technology. To use a felt tip with a certain kind of pigment coming out of it.
Yeah, the Poscas are actually acrylic paints in a pen form.
Exactly.
And in some ways they're better than acrylic paints in a pen form because the uniformity and the consistency that you get out of them is second to none in tools that even are paint itself.
Yeah, whereas all of these are still very much markers and don't get us wrong, they are great markers.
Yeah.
They are just claiming to be something that they aren't quite.
Yes, and they're at a price point where with just a bit more you can get, let's say, the Rolls Royce of markers, which right now is the Posca for us.
So these cost roughly 200 plus rupees.
Per. So that's like $3 or $4 per marker, which is not nothing, especially when you are, maybe using them for a variety of uses or getting them as a set. That adds up.
Right.
It's, yes, sometimes you want to get premium tools, but sometimes you just need one. Even the Poscas, actually, the nice thing about them is that I was able to get my gold Posca just on its own because all I wanted was a gold.
Right.
Now, the thing is, after having seen the Posca gold, things like this, things like the brushstroke, not as goldy. and that's a subjective thing, but
You heard it here. You heard it here first, folks. Not as goldy.
hashtag station nerds. Speaking of things that are gold, Samir, why don't you settle something for us, which is the dress blue and gold, or is it white and grey, or if whatever that particular internet kerfuffle was?
Well, speaking of gold versus blue dresses and also orange popsicles, I made this.
You're finally, gelling with the kids and doing things that they do.
Am I?
Yes, you are.
Well, it's
called for it.
it's guns and women
It's
and
guns,
dress.
women, and yes.
I believe
famous
the
dress.
official term these days is bad girl art.
Oh wow! Hashtag bad girl art. Wow, we need to know more about this. Tell us about this. Not bad.
If I had only left the gun out, it would have been good girl art. For some reason, I don't know.
Okay. Is there like a some kind of amendment in some country somewhere where the presence of a gun is?
I have no idea. I keep seeing these terms and I scroll past them.
But yeah, tell us about using the Permapaque.
So I used the Permapaque, thankfully, from the very beginning, just by looking at them and looking at the way the felt nibs were. I kind of got into it thinking that I would use it like a marker. And I think that's the thing. If you go in with that expectation, it's fine. I went in wanting to do kind of a comic illustration kind of look where you can see the marker look of it.
It's not something many people, let's say under 30, will be familiar with. It was in a lot of art when we were growing up in the 80s.
Exactly.
And 90s.
What I found very interesting about this pen is that I could get the marker look that I have at these edges and things like that, which are purposely left, open to have that look. But I could also get, and again, this orange is probably my favorite.
It's
marker.
It's the closest to something, let's say, layered.
Yes, and that's what really works with the orange, because I think more than the other rings, I had a pencil drawing under it, and you can still see a very faint version of that pencil drawing. And the way this semi-opaque is the best I can say about it. Semi-opaque orange fits on top of that. It really gives it this kind of three-dimensional look, which is great.
It does look a lot like advertising marker art and comic art in the style.
It almost looks like a gouache on top of a pencil drawing.
Yes,
which is a great look.
Whereas that blue, while it is beautiful, is also all over the place.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The problem I found with these markers is that the colors work in inconsistent ways. This works very differently than this does.
Yes, which is supposed to be, I guess, a metallic blue, and we'll get back to that.
Yeah, and this one is slightly more opaque, or I'd say much more opaque than this one, where if you just go over it a second time, you can get a nice darker tone. So
on a white paper, but not on the black one.
Which, once I got through the blues, I kind of figured out that, okay, I can kind of layer them to get a darker tone. So I use that to shade this part of the dress. But the point is that I think the opacity of these markers varies widely between the colors. That's the other issue.
Speaking of tight things that vary widely, Minjal Kadakya.
I don't know about that intro.
This is your test drive, which as a calligrapher, I think you are well set for chiseled abs and chiseled tips.
So there's a script called Neuland, which you all are familiar with as well.
Are we?
Yeah,
it's all Neu to me.
Yes, that is what I meant.
The digital versions of these were some of my favorites when doing design projects in college. So I've used it a lot, but I do not, by any stretch of the imagination, have the skill to write it by hand.
So my experience with I use the broad chisel tip, and like I said, it's not entirely opaque. But yeah, sure. I mean, for lettering, it's not half as bad.
It's pleasing. Certainly, the pigments are pleasing. There's not too much of a bleed even on paper like this. It does. The chisel is, at least in some of these, is quite a nice solid chisel. It's not too.
There's a sharpness to the edge which
Yeah.
is not as common as you'd like in markers.
And what you can do is you can use it like this to get a flat line.
Mm,
You can use it from the side to get a slightly thicker line.
and a rounded line almost.
Yes, and you can also use it like this to get a really hairline
Oh,
stroke.
that is brilliant. And did you use the other side, the bullet end?
I actually used the bullet end to fill in the colors in
Yes,
the
yes.
counterforms. And if you can see, like you mentioned, it pulls off the paper.
Yeah, it pills, it balls, it sort of takes some material with it, which is not always good.
So I don't know if this is to do only with this particular marker, or is that like also something that the Posca...
I think the Poscas also did it from what I remember, but not too bad. In the sense that we kind of try to stick to similar papers, similar grades of things, and the Posca, in some ways, it sort of applies itself more rather than,
I think
pulls away.
the Poscas use a medium that's a lot more liquid, so it almost works similar to, I guess, correction fluid or something, where it kind of flows out and covers the paper.
We will get back to correction fluid, and speaking of which, here is my test drive made with the Permapaques. I kind of had a problem with the blue, but it was not too much of a problem, and it may not even show up on camera. But basically, I stuck to figure drawing. I did a test on this with the chisel tip orange, which I thought would give me an interesting line, and it did, but it was not good for this subject. Maybe if I was doing something more stylized, more graffiti-like and all that. Here I needed sort of, I needed more organic line weights, things that could taper, things that I could flow easily. For that, the chisel tip is actually pretty good. It's a big fat marker, so you can kind of like hold it and almost like scribe with it rather than sort of pushing it into place. It moves quite well. That's actually an important thing when it comes to markers, because a lot of the time you guys, like, you are pulling smooth lines, he's kind of like doing these feathery things. When you need control on a line, you need this like Goldilocks zone of it being just right. What isn't just right, and I hope this shows up on camera, is these are two different colors. Two figures, two different colors. They're drawn in the same session with the same pen, but she's blue and she's grey. And I was not expecting that. This is the same chisel tip, the same chisel end, and yes, this is supposed to be a metallic blue marker, but I didn't expect it to be so pronounced over the same sheet of paper in the same session. Now, if I was doing this, let's say as a commercial commission, and many people do use markers in commercial ways, they use Poscas. And we know that now for a reason, because the line consistency like this would be unacceptable. I would not want to put something out where a monochrome thing like this had such different varied blues without me intending it. Now, there's one thing where there are times where I like it, where it's like, this is a bit bluer there because I know that there's just one pass and then the outer one is a bit darker because it's two passes. But that's control. This I only noticed afterwards. And now that's a question of, is it because it's too old? Is it because it's just built that way?
I think that probably is to do with metallic colors by themselves. I think that's what we can...
We had the same problem with the brushstroke. And Samir, I think you explained it the way those were brush pens. So they kind of had a engineering thing.
Yeah, I think the thing we found with the brushstroke brush pens was that it seemed to be giving out the silver, grey, metallic effect of it from one part of the nib, and the pigment color part of it.
Yeah, and you can sort of see that in yours, not too at an angle. Yes, you can. Maybe not. From the front.
It's nowhere as textured as we were getting with the brushstroke.
Yeah,
But again, I have to say, like, this is meant to be a gold. It's not gold.
No, it's a green. And
yes, I've even tried to take pictures of this from an angle against a light to see
It
if
does not
there's any
fluoresce.
sort of shine to it.
No, and this is not silver either. This is
That's a
grey.
grey.
That's a grey.
If
It's
you
not
told
silver.
me that was made with a pencil, I would almost believe you.
I was going
the
for that
carpenter's
effect.
pencil,
Yes. Yes.
Like even I used the gold here for a little accent, and it came out so green and so terrible that I actually went back in. I couldn't find my correction pen, so I used
Oh, you use
a UD Posca to cover up stuff here.
Well, that's a use that maybe people are not aware of.
Yeah, because the Posca is eminently controllable, right? Unlike even white ink or like a
an
pen,
actual correction pen isn't very controllable.
not as controllable as this, and that is why there's a reason these things are so sought after, so well regarded, expensive as well. Because you can get stuff out of the Uni Posca that you cannot get out of the Sakura Permapaque, and Sakura makes wonderful things. We've covered some of them before on this channel.
The jelly rolls.
The jelly roll, we love those. Those are white and they're wonderful, and maybe the Permapaques are really good when they're new, but 2 or 3 years down the line, which is, let's face it, a realistic amount of time for you to have a set of markers. Not everyone is using markers every day all the time, especially not in this world where there is so much stationery. We are in our 30 something episode, even if you just used one of those every day.
I think Sakura very rightly kind of brands themselves and prides themselves as being a manufacturer of some of the best coloring materials.
Absolutely.
And they have reason to do that. They started in the 1920s or 30s as a crayon manufacturer. And we've mentioned this in our episode about the Camlin oil pastels. Sakura is the one who invented the oil pastel because they wanted it to be more colorful than a crayon. They're the ones who then went on to do the Pigma microns, which we will cover in a future episode, which also come in colors. And they then, of course, went on to invent the the gel pen itself.
Right. And then we got the jelly roll, which is a beautiful white pen.
So I think to some extent, Sakura got to the 2000s and realized that there was one entire category of markers and coloring things which they kind of didn't have a presence in, that being the paint marker. And in some ways, maybe this is an early attempt, and knowing them, they will, make it better over time.
I believe, again, this must be targeted as, at, bullet journal, the bullet journal crowd, or just lettering artists, because as a lettering artist, you're not very concerned about the color that, you're eventually putting down, unless it is a final commission piece. You'd be okay with some variation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that is true. And some variation can be interesting. It's just, it's not always the variation you want, which is the thing.
I think most of these, and it's the same thing we're finding with a lot of these markers, is I think the problem is not with the marker itself, but it's just being sold as the wrong thing. Because that thing might be popular at the moment.
Yes, I mean, you've got so many knockoffs of the Copic markers.
Right.
And from whatever, I've tried a Copic once in a while, and I've not done it extensively to be able to tell you, why the Copic is the Copic. But there are a lot of knockoffs that I'm sure just aren't as good, but are cheaper, or sort of get enough of the job done and satisfy that need of like, okay, I need something with a chisel tip and a brush tip in the Copic's case. In this case, something semi-permanent, something like a Posca, but not quite. It is good enough. And maybe when it's new, it is better than good enough. It's just not good enough for the test drives that we have put it to today. So we would, if you want a recommendation, I'd say if you find one cheap, sure. But if you're putting, let's say, 2/3 or 3/4 of the way of cost, the Uni has not let us down in any form ever.
I'd say that if you're looking for something that is a paint pen that works across a whole bunch of surfaces, there's no contest.
And I should mention that these Unis that I have, the gold one and this white one, were bought at the same time 3 or 4 years ago.
So there you go.
And they have not been used even as much as this.
Right.
I use them very sparingly. Sometimes 8 months, a year would go by without using them. So they're still fine. These ones are not. And I think that's enough of a caution, let's say. Buyer beware. They're good, but
I think if you're looking for something that gives you the look of a marker, which you can see Minjal kind of leans into with the lettering, and I've done that with these kind of edges, you can't get that look with a Uni Posca.
no, it's a paint marker. So yes, if you're looking for a good chisel tip marker, absolutely, this can be on your list.
And I believe they've slightly changed the logo now. It looks different than this.
They've rebranded the.
And they've also made the pointed tip.
The chisel tip.
No,
the bullet.
Oh, the bullet,
tip.
yeah.
They have made that thinner in the newer version.
Okay, so it's
the one
closer to than this type of uni, which is
so
1.3 mm.
Which is why I said, knowing Sakura and their wonderful track record of the things they've invented and developed, this will keep improving over time.
It will. And we hope to keep improving our show. And every week we will be back with other things and other improvements and not so improved things. You can follow us at the links that are on screen right now, as well as at Inky Memo, which is the brand that runs all of this, of which Stationery Test Drive is just one thing. We are all to be found doing our own things, including Test Drive, every day and every night and every time in between on the internet and beyond. We will see you next week with another test drive, more test drives, more markers. Maybe we should try other things now that we're on this run of, we can if you have a marker that you really like, and yes, we've never really tried the Copics, we've never tried those kind of markers.
Copics are very expensive, yes.
Yes, exactly.
I've not been able to buy a Copic for that reason.
Yeah, and because you're not sure, like even the Permapaque, you pick this up with the notion of knowing how you would use it.
I mean, the problem
would
with
you
markers,
put that money in?
Yeah. The problem with markers is that we all know they have kind of a limited lifespan. So unless you really want to use one. And
yes, well, again, we're beating a dead horse here maybe, but when you have that limited life being so consistent and so good, maybe just buy a cheaper marker and run through it. Run the chisel out. Maybe it's not as good. This chisel is extremely good. That's one thing to really recommend for it. With the right color, that chisel, you can get something great. But yeah, if you can afford them, sure, go ahead. And that's all from us for this week. We'll see you next time. I'm Vishal.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal.
And seductive form factor for better mouthfeel.